Hey everybody, my name is Brad. I'm one of the pastors here at Copper Hills, and if you're new to us here in the house, welcome. We're glad that you're here. At home, welcome. Merry Christmas to you. This was probably the last time that we'll be able to say Merry Christmas to you in this way. Not ever, but like this week before Christmas. At least we hope it's not ever, right? So each week we have folks that check in on our online services, and I noticed over the last many months that we've been doing this, there are like 60 or so hits from people in Canada. And then I realized after talking to my mother this last week, 30 of those are her each week. She really likes to tune in, so Mom, Merry Christmas to you. But we really are glad that as the numbers of people contracting COVID go up, that our church family is not like checking out. Our views online are there. And so it's such an important avenue to be together as a church family, though we're not on the same campus all the time, but we are one church family. And in time, this too will pass, and we will be back together as a church family. But for now, Merry Christmas. A couple of things before I begin. We've been telling you the last couple of weeks of some really cool things that are happening here on campus over the early days of the new year. And one of them is we want to read through the entire Bible in 72 hours together as a church, not individually at home, but here on campus. So we've broken up the 72 hours into 10-minute slots. And if you reserve that in the lobby, we have our team of volunteers are there tonight. They'll sign you up for a slot, or you can email our church office, chc@copperhills.org, and we'll give you your slot for that. But I just think it sets such a cool tone for the very beginning of the year that this church is going to get its authority from the written, inspired scriptures that God's given us. And we're going to read it through, and that's what we're going to build this next year on. It's a book filled with hope and conviction in the appropriate ways, but it is what our God gave us. And what a gift it is to us. So sign up for that if you would. And then just a reminder, this Wednesday, we're going to do a Christmas Eve gathering here on campus at 7 o'clock. There will also be something online for you at home. And then Christmas Eve, the 24th, 3 times, 2, 3:30, and 5. Here's what we need some help with. We don't know exactly how many people to expect because there's no analytics for this year, right? And so if you would be so kind to go onto our website, copperhills.org, and register for which one of those gatherings you, your family, and friends want to come. We want to make sure that we have appropriate safety measures in place, appropriate distancing, and so on. So if you would let us know, that really helps us plan and create the safest possible environment that we can. Cool? All right. So over the last 3 weeks, and again, this is 4th time in a row, we're thinking through this single word as it relates to Christmas, with. And it comes from this idea that God came to be with us, and then we've been thinking through what are the implications for us in real life that God came to be with us and to live among us and to be part of our everyday experience. And each week we've gone back to this passage of Scripture, which is a promise that was given 735 years before it actually was fulfilled, through the life of a young teenage girl that gets pregnant and her fiancé Joseph, and we know all the story that's related to that, but it's the fulfillment of this promise, and then it's repeated to Mary and Joseph after 735 years. This is what it is. Look, the virgin will conceive a child, she'll give birth to a son, and you'll call him Emmanuel, which wasn't his street name. Jesus was his street name, but this was a name God gave his son to tell us what his son would be about. And this is what his son would be about. His son would be about God coming to us, because Emmanuel means God is with us. So the last 3 weeks, we've been thinking through what exactly are the implications for us as followers of God, that God came to be with us. What are the implications in everyday, ordinary life, when we shop online, when we put up our Christmas decorations, when we go to parties, when we are in our at-home office, when we're alone, when we celebrate with family and friends, in ordinary circumstances of ordinary life? What does it mean that God is with us in those moments? Well, the truth is, of course, that as we look at our lives, we realize that there is absolutely nothing ordinary about living this last year. It's entirely new for all of us. And so I wonder what it means for God to live with us in this time when wave after wave of bad news hits. And I think some of us might even wonder if God is really with us. I've had conversations with some people where they're questioning whether God is really real because of how this has impacted them with such bad news. And for those, I guess the idea, those folks who would conclude that, I guess the idea of God being with us is just more of a myth, or maybe a fairy tale, or maybe even a cruel, manipulative joke. So as we think of 2020, it has been a year in which more than a few of us have asked those questions and something similar, because it's been a year of bad news upon bad news coming into a bad news situation. And we wonder, when will the good news come? Well, so here's the thing with bad news and good news. Bad news delivered in an already bad situation creates despair and loss of hope. And we really do wonder if good news is coming, if there is such a thing. However, when good news is delivered in an already good situation, you know what that creates? That creates entitlement and apathy. And you actually miss the good in the good news. It seems like ordinary news. It's disappointing in that way. And then, when bad news is delivered into a good situation, it produces fear and anxiety. And we hope that the bad news isn't real, that it isn't going to happen. Typically, our first reaction when bad news first lands is to say, I hope that doesn't happen to me. Just this afternoon, I was reading a headline of an article that came through on Reuters News. And it was the Prime Minister of Britain has declared that Britain's going to shut down for another 2 weeks because, brace yourself, there's a new strain of COVID in Britain. And my wife's first response was, oh no, because what do you and I think? If there's a vaccine, it won't cover it. It might come here. It's out of control. There's no end to it, right? So when bad news lands in bad news, there's despair. But when bad news lands in a good situation, it produces fear. What would your response be to this when early in January we started to hear these words? COVID cases are soaring in China, could be spread globally. I hope that's not true. Unemployment is rising. I hope that's not true. Environmental change is speeding up. I read something this last week, or I saw it on one of the news channels, that in 20 to 40 years, Phoenix is expected to be a desert wasteland. Yeah, I hope that doesn't happen. I just got tested for COVID, and I know that we were together just a few days ago. That's not good. I hope I don't get that, right? Look, I don't think we're coming for Christmas this year. Yeah. So the opposite is also true. Not only is it create fear when bad news comes into a good situation, but what happens when good news comes into a bad situation? Here's what it does. It amplifies the good news. We celebrate and we hope it is true. And that hope creates optimism and joy every time. Good news in a bad situation becomes great news. And we hope that it's true. Virus seems to unexpectedly be dying out and it's no longer a threat. Well, I hope that's true, right? New cases and death rate from COVID near zero. Hope that's true. Vaccine 100% safe, 100% effective, 100% moral. I hope that's true. Economy and unemployment rebounding at record levels. Good news in a bad situation amplifies the good news. Phoenix daily temperature to be 76.4 degrees every day for the next 10 years with a drizzle between 2 and 5 in the morning each day. I hope that happens, right? Good news in a bad situation. Here's one. Eating ample quantities of processed sugar extends life expectancy and creates general good health. Yeah, good news in a bad situation. You see, when you hear good news in a bad situation, you want it to be true. You really want it to be true. Now, that doesn't make it true, but it does produce the same hope and joy as if it was true. Now, this is what's so interesting to me and why I say all that. When God announces to the world that he's coming to live in our neighborhood, and he names Jesus Emmanuel, God is with us, it's described as good news. It's good news. Here is a direct quote from an angel who came to a group of shepherds doing their routine of watching their flocks by night. You heard that, you sang the song. And there they are 2,000 years ago, and suddenly the sky lights up, and we're told that this is the glory of God. That is a great birth announcement. Like, I've seen some gender reveals, nothing like this one. This is amazing. It's apparently the glory of God. What is that? Whatever it is, it's got to be amazing, right? And this is what the angel has to say. In Luke 2:10, he says, don't be afraid. And the reason he would say don't be afraid is because they're afraid. Of course they are. Have you ever seen the glory of God expressed in that way, where it kind of lights up with 30 billion lumens and the sound of about 30,000 lightsabers? Right? It's amazing what it must have been to look at that. But it also is frightening, and it is for them. And so the angel says, hey, don't be afraid. Listen up. I bring you good news that will bring great joy to all people. I just want to reassure you guys, as shocking and as scary as this all looks right now, this is going to turn out to be very, very good news. Here's the thing. Most of us know what good news is and what the angel announces right after this. We know where he's going with it. But here's the problem with that. That familiarity spoils the surprise. But try to put yourselves, if you can, for just a little bit in the sandals of the shepherd who are seeing this glory show, and suspend your knowledge of what the good news was. To pretend for a second you don't know what it is. You don't know what's coming next, because they didn't know what was coming next. They just knew it was going to be good news. And if you see it announced in that kind of way, it's got to be incredible, doesn't it? If that's the length to which God goes to show up and say there's good news, imagine how good the good news is. In fact, it's so good that there's a proper name for it. And the proper name in Greek is euangelion. You don't have to remember. It doesn't mean much. It just means this. It's the good news. We have another name for it. It's called the gospel. That's what it is. The gospel of great joy to all people is what the angel says. And then the angel adds, when you hear what it is, when you hear what the news is all about, you are going to hope it's true. Now, I know you don't know what it is just yet, but when you do, it's going to be so good, it's going to create incredible, unimaginable joy. Hara. That's what it's going to create. Hara. You don't know what hara is. You know it as joy. You know that deep, unimaginable inner gladness and delight and rejoicing. That's hara. Joy is a feeling of deep-seated pleasure or anticipation of something really good, really sure going to happen. Happiness that spontaneously erupts from within, resulting in uncontained anticipation. It's going to be good news, and it's going to have great joy attached to it. I'll give you an example. A small example, but an example nonetheless. For the last 6 days, every evening, at some point between 5 and 7, our doorbell has rung. And we have run to the door to, of course, answer and to see who's there, and there's no one there. 6 nights in a row, doorbell ditchers. Now, that could be really annoying, except every time we open the door, there's a gift at our front door. Apparently, someone or someone's is 12 days of Christmasing us. And it has resulted in much joy for us. It really has. Our guess is that when I get home tonight, someone will have left the seventh day of Christmas gift. I'm anticipating that. I may be expecting too much, but after 6 days, I see a pattern. And each night the response when the gift is there, it's been, no way, they did it again. What have they brought us this time? And it's been the coolest stuff. It really has. And I just want to know if those responsible are in the room or online. I have a totally reliable report that effective immediately, the 12 days of Christmas have become the 365 days of Christmas. That would give us even more joy. See, this is what good news does. It produces great joy. But there's one more element of the angel's good news that produces great joy. And this part would have made little to no sense to them at all. Apparently, if the angel is right, whatever the good news is that's going to produce great joy is for all people. Now, we blow past that and we go, well, I'm one of the all people, so yeah. But remember, you don't know what the good news is yet. We're suspending our knowledge of that. What probably made the shepherds look at each other in disbelief was this last part. You see, the world in the day that they were in Palestine, was far too fractured and broken and tense with suspicion and distrust and open rebellion that no news, as good as it could possibly be, could be for everyone. It just couldn't be for everyone. There wasn't enough unity, there wasn't enough sameness, there wasn't enough harmony, there wasn't enough love for one another, that you would actually want good news for everybody, because you had enemies, and you had people who would take advantage of you, and it was just a world of chaos and bipartisanship and political tension and riots and dysfunction and chaos. See, Palestine was a land for the Jews, and it was their home, but they lived under foreign tyranny for hundreds of years. And the latest version of that was Roman oppression. It meant they had little freedom. They were taxed into poverty. They were under constant surveillance. They had lost their identity as people. They had given away their language and their dignity. Even within their own religious structure and community, their leaders vied for power and control, and some had actually betrayed them and then sided with Caesar for their own selfish benefit. How could any news possibly be good news for everyone, and for sure wouldn't create joy if it was good news for my enemy? There were frequent riots driven by religious and ethnic discrimination and desperation, and an underground revolt fomented by a group of people called zealots. The Romans had brought with them the dregs of honor and shame society, and they had this religious mandate from Caesar that he was God and he would be their provider, and it was simply a mess as a culture. What possible good news could be great joy for everyone? Good news for the Jews, for sure. That would have been the desire of the shepherds. But there was no way this could be for their enemies, for the Gentiles and the Romans and the Samaritans and the people of Syria and Egypt and faraway Mesopotamia and Spain. No way. They must have misunderstood what the angel said. Certainly this was not for everyone. And yet, what was happening in front of them was undeniable, and the power was quite convincing for them. No doubt how the angel's good news got delivered to the shepherds was a bit awe-inspiring and unnerving. But we know that this was such good news to them that they really hoped was true, that in spite of all of it not making sense, because it created enough great joy for them to abandon their flocks by night and hurry to Bethlehem. There was enough there. Maybe they just went for themselves, but whatever the good news was, they wanted great joy. They wanted to know what it was, even if it was for everybody. Now, if we didn't already know the good news, and we do, the logical question is, what exactly was the good news that the angel announced? And here's what it was. In verse 11, the angel said, here's the good news, brings great joy. It's for everyone. The Savior, yes, the Messiah, the Lord, has been born in Bethlehem, the city of David. Good news, great joy, all people. Now, yes, it would take about 30 years for the good news to be revealed to people outside of Jesus' family. And it would really only be revealed to them for a short 3-year span, where the Savior, the Messiah, the Lord, born in Bethlehem, would be revealed. But when he would capture their imagination. His message, his teaching, his claims, his actions, his power, his wisdom, his truth and grace caught on because he was good news, and it created great joy. And in fact, in the end, it would prove that it was for all people. And even when the nation would give way to the deception of Jesus' enemies who were so threatened by his good news, and they conspired to and ultimately murdered him, even the worst bad news day that ever happened on earth turned out to be the best good news day ever. There's no stopping the good news. That still brings great joy, and it's for all people. And when you see it as good news, you lean in and you hope it's true. But what concerns me so much for our generation, this generation, it breaks my heart almost more than anything, maybe anything, is that so many in this generation are not leaning into the good news because somehow they do not see it as good news and they don't lean in on it. Or many who know it is good news don't lean in because life is already good. And the good news, rather than creating great joy, just creates entitlement and apathy and Christian consumerism. And it doesn't overwhelm us anymore. It just feels like ordinary news. And it's not meant to be that. And for some who know it's good news and it produces great joy, squander that joy thinking it's private and it's just for them. And it's not for people like their neighbors, like their colleagues at work, like their family and their friends. And the good news turns out to be less than what it's intended. It's meant to surprise us, even if we're familiar with it. It's meant to amaze us, even if we know the story already. Does it amaze you? Does it surprise you? Maybe the only good news that you've seen lived out is unattractive. I cut this out of an article that I read this afternoon. I don't even have it in my notes, but it so stunned me to think about it. It's an article written by a person who doesn't have a faith in Jesus, but has observed some parts of our Christian community, kind of like the celebrity pastors who he's particularly speaking about. He writes this at the end of the article: "I'm not religious, so it's not my place to dictate to Christians what they should and should not believe. Still, if someone has a faith worth following, I feel their belief should make me feel uncomfortable for not doing so. However, if they share 90% of my lifestyle and values, then there's nothing especially inspiring about them." And then this part: "Instead of making me want to become more like them, it looks very much like they want to become more like me." And when that happens, we have missed the good news, because it doesn't produce great joy. But it's meant to, and it is for all people. And so now, in this last year, something has happened around the world and in our country and in our lives that has presented a new backdrop for the good news of Jesus coming into this world. Emmanuel, with God with us. You see, the good news is now coming into a bad situation, into chaos and uncertainty and fear and angst and mistrust and tension and rebellion. And when good news comes into a bad situation, it amplifies the good news to great news. And that produces great joy. And we just can't help but give it away to others because it lives outside of us. It oozes out of us. 40 plus years ago, I went to a jeweler to look to buy a diamond ring for my girlfriend, Elfie. I decided I had wanted to marry her, and I guess that's what you do. She expects a ring, so you got to come up with the ring. So I went to the jeweler, and told him I was looking for a diamond and a setting, and he went to his safe, and he pulled out a small box of diamonds and brought it to the counter. There must have been 50 or so, various sizes, shapes, that kind of thing. He asked how much I wanted to spend. And I said, I know, like $50. No, I didn't say that. I gave him a number, and he pulled out a diamond, and he told me that with the setting, it would be about that amount. And it was a huge amount for me at the time. My response was, well, it's not very big, and it's not very impressive for that kind of money. He looked at me kind of incredulously, and he said this. He said, young man, you cannot evaluate the quality, brilliance, and size of the diamond just by looking at it. You need to see it against the right backdrop to fully see its value. And then he reached underneath the counter and he pulled out a black velvet cloth and set it there, and he took the diamond that I had picked and he put it on that black cloth, and suddenly it sparkled. It just came alive. It was way bigger than I thought it was, and the facets just sparkled backlight, and I thought, that is it. That's the one. That's for her. Here's the point. Throughout God's history with us, when he has been seen and accepted for who he is, and he has been received as truly good news that produces great joy in us, it has most often been when it has come against the black backdrop of hardship, fear, chaos, uncertainty, and bad news. And I think that for some of us is our story as well. That is how we discovered him. Way back when that Emmanuel, God with us promise came from God through a prophet named Isaiah, his people were in a very bad situation. They had been quarantined inside the walls of the fortress of Jerusalem, and there were two large armies that were sieging the city, and they had for some days. King Rezim and King Pekah, you might remember from the first week, we talked about this, the two countries to the north of Israel, or Jerusalem, had besieged the city. They had cut off the water supply, and food was running out, and now it was just a matter of time before the front doors of the city of Jerusalem would be stormed and burned down, and everything would be over. And on top of that, the king, King Ahaz, had betrayed his people. He had betrayed God, in fact, by giving away the treasures of the temple that God had given them as a vehicle for worshiping, and he had sold them, given them to a country far to the north, so that country would come and protect him from the kings that were besieging it. It was horrible, chaotic, desperate. It was a bad news situation. And then God sends a messenger to Ahaz, and this is what Isaiah says: the people who walk in darkness, that's bad news, will see a great light. That's good news. For those who live in the land of deep darkness, bad news, a light will shine, good news. And here's the good news: for a child is born to us, and a son will be given. And here's how good the news gets: the government will rest on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor. Underline this: Mighty God, God himself, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. In other words, the bad news, the darkness, the deep darkness is going to be lit up by a bright light. In fact, what's going to make that light so bright is how dark it is. You see, when you add light to an already lit up situation, the light is barely noticed. But when things are dark and desperate and chaotic, you can just add a little bit of light and it changes everything. You can see with it. You can move forward. You can make out shapes. You have some hope. You have joy, maybe even great joy. Let me show you something. Did you notice the candles as they were lit? How many of you were drawn to those after they were lit? Did you notice them? Take a look at what happens when those candles are up against a black backdrop. You see, they draw your attention. They're just candles. They aren't really all that bright, but it's what draws our attention, and we can see them. It would be a little 8-pound, 6-ounce baby boy in a podunk little town called Bethlehem, just south of Jerusalem, that would lie in a manger, unforgettable, unseen by just a few people and some animals. But when it is the God of the whole universe, Emmanuel, who comes to be with us, even a little bit of light in a little baby lights up the whole world. And this is what he does. It's God coming, but we see him in the black, and it's the black backdrop. A little bit of light in a dark place draws our attention to it. And turn the lights back on. This is how Jesus, good friend John, who lived with Jesus 3 years of his public life, states it. In John 8:12, he says, Jesus spoke to the people one more time, and he said, I am the light of the world. If you follow me, you'll not have to walk in darkness, because you will have the light that leads to life. This is such good news for John and his buddies and those who trusted Jesus and became his followers. First century life was hard for anybody in Palestine, but no group of people faced more opposition, persecution, and difficulty than those who publicly described themselves as followers of Jesus. Nobody faced what they did. They lost property, they were arrested, they were murdered, they were maligned and persecuted in every imaginable way. Homes and property were confiscated. And yet, they held on to this one thing, that good news of great joy had come into the world. Jesus was that light for them, and he is that for us too. I find it so interesting. In Luke 16:16, we read this. This is what Jesus says. Until John the Baptist, the law of Moses and the messages of the prophets were your guides. In other words, prior to me coming into this world, me being the light of the world, you look to like the 10 Commandments and the laws and the prophets. But when I came, but now the good news, there's the good news of the kingdom of God is preached, and everyone is eager to get in. One of the translations says they're forcing their way in. They're so eager to be part of it. Why? Because it's good news of great joy. And for people who were on the outside, are now possible for them to be on the inside. And they're fighting to get into it. Is that yours? Are you fighting to get into the kingdom of good news? I want to ask you, what effect does it have on you to think that Emmanuel came to be with us, that God is with us? Does that come across as good news to the point that produces great joy? And others know it does because they see it ooze out of you. Maybe it's just so familiar that it no longer moves you. Maybe it comes across as good news in a good news situation, so it just produces entitlement and apathy, and you just consume it. Look around. It may not be that good, or you may be missing out something better. What an opportunity again to look around and see the brilliance of God. God with us against the backdrop of the current culture and where we're at. A child is born, a son is given, and you will call him Emmanuel because he is God with us, and he will save us from the darkness of our sin. Jesus, it is just simply too simple and too benign to say thank you. There's so much more to this. Jesus, would you, for those of us that would say, man, it's been a long time since I've really had great joy at the thought of this good news. Would you help us think again, look again, and think about the implications of what it means that you came to us? Would this Christmas be a refreshed good news for us? Might it produce great joy? And those that we're with in person, by Zoom, or however we're together this Christmas, may they note that our great joy comes from the good news, and it's for them too. Jesus, you are Emmanuel, God with us, and we're ever so grateful that you didn't think it too much to come and be with us. Thank you so much, Jesus. Amen.